The discovery of the alien probe was Earth's first real glimpse into a vast, unknown cosmos. It began with a routine scan. Nothing more than a minor blip on the radar, an anomaly in the outer reaches of Neptune's orbit. But when it was identified as a derelict craft, the curiosity quickly turned to obsession. Dr. Elise Merrow stood at the head of the research team, staring at the holographic projection of the alien ship. It was unlike anything humanity had encountered before. Sleek, with sharp angles and an energy signature that flickered erratically. The exterior was coated in materials that didn't match anything found on Earth, yet they held strange, almost familiar qualities. There was something human about it. It was as if the ship had been designed by someone who had studied Earth for centuries, maybe longer. "We're looking at an alien species," Elise said quietly. "But whoever built this ship, they've been watching us." The room fell silent. Her words had the unsettling weight of truth. It wasn't just the design of the ship that was disconcerting. It was the technology embedded within it. Earth's engineers, eager to get their hands on the alien technology, began to make a startling discovery. The ship's primary propulsion system appeared to operate using human-derived nuclear fusion principles. The algorithms within its artificial intelligence mimicked military strategies taken from humanity's global conflicts, refined into something even more precise, more effective. Ellis watched the scientists run simulations on the ship's systems. A map of Earth's technological advancements began to form, connecting dots between human achievements and the aliens' integration. It was clear. The alien species had reverse-engineered humanity's greatest innovations. Some technologies were eerily similar to Earth's own, like the improved propulsion systems and the energy shields, but others, especially the weaponry, were far more advanced. "This can't be a coincidence," one of the lead engineers muttered, his voice tinged with awe and apprehension. "The designs are too close to what we've been working on. The alien tech, it's us." The room buzzed with questions, but none were more pressing than the one that hung in the air. Why? The probe's data logs, after being decrypted, revealed a chilling truth. The alien race, which they would later name the Catheri, had been systematically studying Earth for centuries. From the time of the Cold War to humanity's race to colonize space, the Catheri had been watching, taking notes, mimicking. Their species, once thought of as a distant, peaceful race, had carefully watched humanity's rise through technological leaps and political upheaval. They had tracked our wars, our triumphs and failures, all the while building their own civilization by copying what worked. The world governments scrambled to figure out what this meant. If these aliens were so intent on copying Earth's advancements, what would stop them from copying humanity itself? Elise wasn't so sure they were ready for the answer. The more she studied the alien data, the more she realized that the Catheri weren't just mimicking human technology. They were mimicking human behavior. They had been learning from humanity's resilience, its ingenuity, and its brutal will to survive. But the question still remained. It was only a week later, after Earth's most prominent scientists and military leaders were still reeling from the discovery, that the Catheri made their presence known. The event was not subtle. Without warning, a massive alien ship, an immense floating city of gleaming silver and black, appeared in Earth's orbit, dwarfing anything humanity had ever constructed. Its size and technology were enough to send shockwaves through the global defense networks. The Catheri ship was unlike anything seen before. Its surface was a seamless, organic-looking metal, shimmering with an unnatural iridescence that shifted in the sunlight. Despite its enormous size, it hovered silently, almost as if it were waiting for permission to make contact. The ship's form was an eerie blend of angular and curvaceous, a design that humans couldn't fully comprehend. There was something almost alive about it. The first message humanity received was chilling in its simplicity. "We borrow to survive." The voice was mechanical but calm, its tone not threatening, yet strangely authoritative. The transmission was in flawless English, human English, not some garbled translation, as if the Cathari had been studying humanity for far longer than they had admitted. The message was short, but its implications were profound. In the days that followed, human governments scrambled to form a response. World leaders convened emergency sessions, unsure of whether to be fearful, curious, or ready to fight. Military forces were placed on high alert. Yet, despite the uncertainty and the building paranoia, Earth's leaders made a collective decision. Contact, at least for the moment, would be peaceful. Dr. Elise Merrow, now at the forefront of the diplomatic efforts, was thrust into the middle of an interstellar meeting. The United Nations had assembled a team of experts, and Elise, as one of the few individuals who had analyzed the Cathari probe's systems, was summoned to lead the human delegation. The first meeting was unlike anything anyone had ever imagined. A massive chamber had been created in the ship's hangar, with a low-hanging ceiling and walls that appeared to ripple as if the ship itself was alive. At the center of the room stood 3 Cathari representatives, humanoid in form but taller, their skin a deep shade of violet. They wore intricate clothing that shifted in color, their patterns flowing like liquid silk. The moment Elise laid eyes on them, something inside her shifted. The Cathari exuded a quiet strength, an ancient wisdom that felt both alien and oddly familiar. They resembled humans in many ways, but there was an unsettling sense of something more, something other, lurking beneath the surface. The lead Cathari representative, who introduced himself as Seriketh, spoke first. His voice was soothing, but carried an undercurrent of urgency. "We are the Cathari," he said, his words deliberately slow. "We have watched you, studied you, and we have come to understand your species. We are in need of your help. For millennia, our civilization has struggled to survive the dangers of this galaxy. We have seen civilizations rise and fall, but none have shown the adaptability of your kind, your capacity to innovate, to evolve. That is why we are here." The weight of his words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Elise felt a shiver run down her spine. It wasn't just a request for help. It was an acknowledgement that the Cathari had come to depend on humanity's survival instinct. They had seen what Earth had endured: wars, famines, plagues, and natural disasters. Yet humanity had found a way to adapt, to thrive in the face of adversity. And now, the Cathari wanted to replicate that success. They wanted to copy humanity. Elise's mind raced as she processed the implications. Was this the beginning of a new chapter in human history? Or were they being drawn into a galactic game where the stakes were far higher than they could imagine? "We ask," Seriketh continued, his gaze intense, "that you share your knowledge with us. Help us survive. Help us build a future, together." The request was simple, but the weight of it, the moral dilemma it posed, was anything but. Elise turned to the others in the room, but no one spoke. The silence was thick with the burden of their decision. Humanity's survival had always been rooted in its ability to adapt, to overcome the odds. But would it be enough to teach an entire alien species how to do the same? The days following the Cathari's formal request were a blur of diplomatic negotiations, scientific debriefings, and global discussions. Earth's governments had spent countless hours deliberating over how to respond to the unprecedented situation. On one hand, the idea of assisting an alien species was thrilling, even historic. On the other, it felt deeply unsettling. Humanity had never been in a position to mentor a galactic civilization before. How could they possibly understand the consequences of such an undertaking? Dr. Elise Merrow's days were consumed by one question: why did the Cathari need humanity? The Cathari had made it clear that they were on the brink of extinction, their once advanced civilization ravaged by cosmic catastrophes, supernovae, black holes, and gamma-ray bursts, events that had decimated their homeworlds and left them scattered across the galaxy. Yet, as Elise reviewed the data gathered from the Cathari probe, a troubling realization began to surface. It wasn't just that the Cathari had been monitoring Earth for centuries. It was the manner in which they had done so. The Cathari had adopted a curious habit of replicating human technology at pivotal moments in Earth's history. The timeline was eerily precise. The first signs of Cathari observation seemed to coincide with the height of Earth's Cold War, an era when humanity was engaged in a nuclear arms race, grappling with the implications of mass destruction. The Cathari had closely followed humanity's military advancements, modeling their own war technologies after Earth's designs. From stealth bombers to nuclear submarines, it seemed that every breakthrough humanity made in the name of survival was carefully copied by the Cathari, who then optimized and modified the tech for their own use. But it wasn't just weapons. The Cathari had copied Earth's economic models, too, adapting capitalist frameworks, resource management systems, and even social policies that prioritized competition and innovation at the expense of cooperation. Ellis couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to their strategy than mere survival. It was as if they weren't just learning how to endure, they were learning how to conquer. They had studied Earth's greatest achievements and its deepest failures. In the way that humanity's history was a mix of brilliant innovation and brutal destruction, the Cathari were now embracing both sides, and it seemed that in doing so, they were creating something dangerous. What are we really teaching them? Elise muttered to herself as she scanned the latest data from the Cathari transmission. The advanced weapon systems they were attempting to build weren't just copies of Earth's designs. They were far more efficient, more lethal. The Cathari had taken humanity's penchant for innovation and applied it with terrifying precision. Her mind raced as she considered the implications. If the Cathari continued to copy humanity's worst tendencies, political extremism, unchecked greed, militarization, they would not just survive. They would become a galactic power, one that could easily overpower weaker civilizations. And what if the Cathari eventually turned their gaze back toward Earth itself? Could they replicate humanity's worst traits and then use them to eliminate the source of the inspiration? As Elise sat in the dimly lit command center, staring at the holographic display of Cathari ships and human tech overlays, she realized something that made her stomach churn. The Cathari weren't just copying Earth. They were studying its survival tactics for the worst possible reasons. They had learned from humanity's resilience, yes, but they had also learned from humanity's capacity for destruction. The Cathari were no longer just students. They were fast becoming a mirror of humanity's darkest impulses. As the weeks passed, the once cooperative alliance between Earth and the Cathari began to show signs of strain. What was initially hailed as a historic collaboration soon devolved into a tense, uneasy partnership. The Cathari's eagerness to adopt human systems, technological, economic, and political, was becoming increasingly alarming. Dr. Elise Merrow continued to work with the Cathari delegation, helping to integrate human knowledge into their society, but her unease only grew. It was evident now that the Cathari were not simply adopting humanity's greatest strengths, they were replicating its weaknesses as well. Every time they successfully adapted a human invention or concept, it was followed by a disturbing shift in their behavior. The Cathari society, once peaceful and cooperative, was beginning to mirror the very same divisions and conflicts humanity had struggled with for centuries. The first signs of this change came when the Cathari leadership, once united in their desperation for survival, began to fracture. The more they integrated human economic models, the more competition and greed infiltrated their ranks. The ideal of cooperation that had defined their species was slipping away, replaced by a drive to outdo one another, to claim the best human strategies as their own. "I'm worried, Elise," said Gian, one of the human advisors assigned to the Cathari project. "They're starting to look like us, really look like us. The more they take, the more they become like the worst parts of our history." Elise didn't need Gian's warning to feel the shift. It was becoming painfully obvious. Once the Cathari had adopted Earth's capitalist economic systems, they started to divide themselves into factions, each vying for control over the most valuable human technologies. The factions argued over military supremacy, resource allocation, and even political influence, mimicking the same corporate power struggles that had plagued Earth for centuries. Their military, once the epitome of disciplined unity, was now divided into rival factions. Some factions embraced human-style warfare, tactics of aggression, deception, and overwhelming force, while others argued for strategic defense, like the pacifist policies Earth had advocated during its Cold War. This split became more pronounced as the Cathari found themselves embroiled in political debates that mirrored humanity's most violent conflicts. Where once they had operated as a united front, the Cathari now fought over territory, resources, and control of the newly integrated technologies. Ellis couldn't help but think of the unintended consequences. The Cathari were too young as a species to truly understand the impact of mimicking humanity's flaws. Unlike Earth, where survival had often been a matter of willpower and brutal necessity, the Cathari had built their society on peace and harmony. But as they adopted human traits, competition, individualism, militarism, they risked undoing everything that had made them unique in the galaxy. A meeting was called between the human and Cathari leaders to discuss the escalating situation. As the representatives from both sides gathered, Elise could feel the tension crackling in the air. The Cathari now looked at each other with distrust, their once illuminated eyes dark with suspicion. It was as if their long-standing philosophy of unity was crumbling under the weight of Earth's influence. Sarikith, the lead Cathari representative, stood before the assembly, his once calm demeanor now clouded by the anxiety of their growing rift. "We have learned much from your people," he began, his voice strained. "But we have also made a grave error. We believe that to survive, we must mimic you fully. But we did not foresee the cost. Your methods, your systems, they come with a price we are only beginning to understand." Elise saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. It was the first sign of self-awareness she had seen in him since their initial encounter. But it was too late. The Cathari had already embraced the worst aspects of human society. The damage had been done. She had a terrible thought then, one that chilled her to the bone. What if the Cathari could never turn back? What if the very survival strategies they sought to replicate had already seeded their downfall? The situation with the Cathari reached a breaking point when the rebellion broke out. It started as a whisper, rumors of a growing faction within the Cathari society who were rejecting the human influence, claiming that humanity's destructive tendencies would ruin them. These dissenters, calling themselves the New Dawn, initially seemed like a small, isolated group. But as the weeks passed, their numbers swelled, and soon they were staging coordinated uprisings on Cathari colonies across the galaxy. Elis had tried to remain neutral, a bridge between humanity and the Cathari, but it was becoming impossible. The New Dawn's insurgents were using tactics so disturbingly familiar to Earth's own history that Elise couldn't help but draw parallels. The guerrilla warfare they employed mirrored human rebellions in times of oppression, sabotage, asymmetric warfare, and psychological manipulation. It was as if the Cathari, in their quest to survive, had begun to mirror humanity's darkest moments. The first attack was on a Cathari mining station in the Iridium Belt. The rebels had infiltrated the station's command center, seized control of its defense systems, and sent a message to the galaxy. They broadcasted a warning. The Cathari have failed. The imitations of humanity will not save them. They must rediscover their true nature, or they will perish. When the message reached Earth, it hit with the force of a bombshell. The Cathari government accused humanity of secretly supporting the rebels, claiming that Earth was actively trying to destabilize their efforts. The evidence was damning. Encrypted transmissions between human military operatives and New Dawn cells were intercepted. Elise's stomach churned as she watched the security footage, but she knew the truth. Humanity had no involvement in the insurgency. The New Dawn was simply using Earth's tactics against the Cathari, driven by their own desperation to stop the societal collapse they saw unfolding. The Cathari leadership was furious. Sarikith, the once calm and collected ambassador, had become a shadow of his former self, his eyes now hollow with fear and anger. His public address was laced with accusations and threats. "We trusted you," he said, voice cracking with emotion. We trusted your knowledge, your systems, your strategies, and now you turn on us." The message was clear: betrayal. Humanity was no longer a partner in the Catheri's survival. They were now enemies in the Catheri's eyes. As the Catheri military turned their focus toward quelling the rebellion, Earth's leaders found themselves caught between the threat of war with an alien species and the uncomfortable reality that humanity's own methods of survival had now been weaponized against them. Elise, who had worked tirelessly to foster understanding between the two species, was devastated. The Catheri had been copying humanity's worst tendencies, and now it was clear they were paying the price. The New Dawn rebels had seized the opportunity, weaponizing humanity's worst traits against their creators. Earth's political leaders were quick to deny involvement, but the evidence painted a darker picture. The accusations were too numerous, and the growing distrust between the two species was becoming impossible to deny. And then, Elise discovered something that sent a chill down her spine. As she analyzed the encrypted communications between New Dawn and their operatives, she realized the rebellion was not simply anti-Catheri. It was targeting the very core of the Catheri's identity. The rebels, with their deep understanding of human psychology and historical conflicts, had been manipulating the Catheri's own sense of self, pushing them to self-destruct. Elise had a sudden, terrifying thought. Had the Catheri been doomed from the start? Had humanity's own survival strategies, flawed, destructive, and chaotic, been destined to lead them to this very moment? And worse, what if the Catheri, once they had fully adopted humanity's traits, could no longer return to the peaceful, cooperative society they once were? The collapse of Catheri unity was swift and brutal. What had begun as a small faction of rebels, the New Dawn, had quickly spiraled into an all-out civil war. The Catheri military, once unified under the banner of survival, now splintered into rival factions, each seeking to outmaneuver the other in a desperate bid for power. The influence of humanity's most destructive traits, greed, ambition, and a thirst for control, had spread like a wildfire, consuming the very society that had once been a model of harmony. Elise watched helplessly from Earth's command center as the situation grew worse. The Catheri leadership, now fractured and paranoid, began targeting any suspected sympathizers, arresting high-ranking officials, and executing those accused of aiding the rebels. The once pristine Catheri colonies, places of breathtaking beauty and peaceful innovation, were now war zones. Cities that had flourished under the Catheri's peaceful way of life were reduced to rubble as factions vied for control of critical resources. The Catheri had learned from humanity's history, but it seemed that they had learned the wrong lessons. Despite the chaos, Elise felt an overwhelming sense of guilt. It had been humanity's ideas, their systems, that had brought the Catheri to this point. What had started as a partnership had turned into a nightmare. Earth had offered them the tools of survival, but in doing so, they had also given the Catheri the tools of self-destruction. Desperation set in as Elise's team began to receive encrypted messages from the Catheri's remaining leadership. Sariketh, the once proud ambassador, now spoke of a grim reality. "We cannot continue. The war has spread too far. Our society is breaking apart. If this continues, we will lose everything we once were." The Catheri, in their attempt to emulate humanity's survival strategies, had become something far worse. Fractured, violent, and caught in an endless cycle of competition and conflict. The very things they had sought to emulate, human resilience and ingenuity, had led them into a dark spiral. Elise knew that a decision had to be made. The Catheri needed intervention, but the question was who would lead it. Humanity had already given them so much: technological knowledge, political systems, and even economic models. But now it seemed that their influence had poisoned the Catheri's mind. The question remained: was it possible for a society to recover from such a deep-rooted copy of humanity's flaws? As Earth's leaders gathered in an emergency summit to discuss the crisis, Elise felt a creeping dread. The Catheri were no longer asking for guidance. They were demanding that humanity take responsibility for the havoc they had helped unleash. The message from Serikith was clear. We need you. You have made us like you, and now we must survive like you. But we can't do it alone. Help us. Elise stood at the front of the conference room, surrounded by diplomats and military commanders. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on her. If humanity intervened, would they be able to correct the Ka-Theri's course? Or would they merely expedite their descent into chaos? She could already see the fractures in Earth's own leadership. Some believed that humanity should distance itself from the Ka-Theri, cut off the partnership, and let them fight their own war. Others argued that the Ka-Theri, now dangerously close to self-destruction, were too important to abandon, both as allies and as a symbol of humanity's reach in the galaxy. The diplomatic channels had already been opened to negotiate peace, but Elise knew the truth. The Ka-Theri had gone too far. They had copied humanity in every way, but the consequences of that imitation had torn them apart. Humanity had taught them to survive, but it seemed the Ka-Theri were learning the hard way that survival came at a price. As Earth's leaders convened in a global summit to decide humanity's next course of action, the mood in the room was fraught with tension. Elise had never felt so isolated. The Ka-Theri were on the brink of total collapse, their once unified society torn asunder by the very systems humanity had helped them adopt. Now the question was whether to save them or let them fall, an impossible decision that seemed to have no right answer. The room was filled with a cacophony of voices, each more desperate than the last. Military leaders advocated for a firm stance, demanding that Earth cut all ties with the Ka-Theri. They've made their bed, one general argued. We should focus on protecting our own future, not cleaning up their mess. Others, more humanitarian in their approach, pleaded for intervention, reminding everyone of the promise humanity had made to the Ka-Theri when they first reached out for help. They're dying out there, one delegate said. If we turn our backs now, we become no better than the very forces that destroy them. Elise sat at the center of the debate, her thoughts a maelstrom of guilt and uncertainty. The Ka-Theri had wanted to survive, but they had gone too far, too fast. They had embraced humanity's greatest successes and also its most dangerous failures. And now, those failures had led them to the brink of annihilation. Elise thought back to her early conversations with Serikith, the quiet hope in his eyes as he had spoken of their potential for survival. Had they ever truly understood what it meant to be human? She wondered. Or had they simply wanted to escape their own flaws, only to inherit humanity's worst traits? The debate grew more heated as Earth's leaders wrestled with their options. They could offer aid, send humanitarian missions, and attempt to help the Ka-Theri rebuild, but there was no guarantee the factions would accept it. The New Dawn rebellion had grown powerful, and the radical elements now controlled significant portions of Ka-Theri space. Even if peace was brokered, it seemed unlikely that the Ka-Theri could ever return to their harmonious ways. Would they even be able to survive, having adopted so much of humanity's chaotic and self-destructive nature? The turning point came when a message arrived from Serikith, a final plea for help. The message was short, but it carried the weight of an entire species' despair. We are on the edge of extinction. We have destroyed ourselves with the knowledge you gave us. We are still the Ka-Theri, but we do not know if we can endure this. Help us, or let us die with dignity. The plea cut through the noise of the summit like a blade. Elise felt her heart stop as she read the message, her mind racing. The Ka-Theri were asking for one final chance, not for conquest, not for domination, but for the opportunity to rediscover what had once made them unique, what had made them a peaceful, cooperative species. They were asking humanity to save them from the very thing they had become. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized the magnitude of the decision before her. Humanity could intervene, attempt to salvage what was left of the Ka-Theri civilization. But at what cost? Were they risking their own survival by offering the Ka-Theri another chance to adapt, to learn, or was it a futile effort to repair the irreparable? Could a species so deeply damaged by the very systems it had copied ever find a path back to unity and peace? The room fell silent as Elise stood up, all eyes turning toward her. She was the one who had been at the center of the Cathari project from the beginning. She was the one who had seen the hope in Sariketh's eyes, and now she had to decide if that hope was worth saving, or if humanity had already given the Cathari too much of itself. Elise took a deep breath, her voice steady, but filled with the weight of her decision. We can't abandon them. But we have to be careful. We must help them find a way to survive without repeating the same mistakes. The room erupted into murmurs of agreement and dissent, but for Elise, the decision was made. Humanity would intervene, but this time, it would be with wisdom, not just knowledge. They would show the Cathari how to rebuild without copying humanity's worst instincts. The decision was made. Humanity would intervene, but not with the tools of war, competition, or brute force that had defined so much of Earth's own history. This time, the approach would be different. Diplomacy, unity, and a deep commitment to rebuilding the Cathari without repeating humanity's mistakes. Elise led the charge, spearheading a joint human-Cathari delegation to mediate peace talks between the warring factions. The Cathari leadership had fractured beyond repair, with the New Dawn rebels controlling key parts of Cathari space, and their militant leaders unwilling to negotiate with the government factions who had embraced human models of conflict and aggression. But Elise's hope was not in political power. It was in the hearts of the people. In her mind, the Cathari could still recover their essence of peace, cooperation, and unity if they were shown a different way of survival. The first step was reintroducing the Cathari to their forgotten traditions, those that had predated the militaristic systems they had copied from humanity. In secret, Elise and Sariketh worked together to organize quiet conferences in neutral zones, away from the eyes of the warring factions. They'd brought together Cathari leaders from both sides of the conflict, those still holding on to the peaceful ways of their ancestors and those who had adopted more aggressive tactics. The goal was not to force an immediate ceasefire, but to open a dialogue about the Cathari's true purpose as a species. "It's not about denying what we've learned from you," Sariketh said, his voice low as they prepared for their first meeting. "It's about learning how to balance it with our own essence. The mistake was believing we had to become you, Elise. We should have been learning from you, but without abandoning what makes us Cathari." Elise nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. The Cathari had always been a peaceful species at heart, but in their desperation for survival, they had imitated humanity's worst traits. Now, the challenge was to guide them back to their roots, showing them that there was strength in cooperation, in community, and in balance with nature. Over the following months, these talks gained traction. Slowly, the different Cathari factions began to realize that they didn't need to mimic humanity's chaotic systems to survive. Instead, they could blend their ancient ways with the best of humanity's knowledge, technology, agriculture, and resource management, with a focus on harmony and collaboration rather than competition and conflict. The turning point came when a ceasefire agreement was signed, and the first joint human Cathari task force was formed, not to fight, but to rebuild. Earth provided resources to help the Cathari repair their war-torn colonies, while the Cathari shared their advanced knowledge of sustainable energy and space travel. Both sides found common ground in the goal of ensuring long-term survival for all, not through power struggles, but through mutual respect and shared purpose. Elise stood at the front of a newly established Cathari community, watching as the once divided factions came together to rebuild. It was not an easy road, and there were still echoes of the violence and mistrust that had plagued their species. But as she observed the first successful joint efforts in restoring their devastated cities, a flicker of hope burned within her. "We're doing it," Sariketh said, his voice full of quiet pride. "We're learning to survive, but on our terms, not as a copy of Earth, but as the Cathari we were always meant to be." As the sun rose over the horizon, casting a golden light on the newly rebuilt Cathari capital, Elise knew that humanity had helped not just the Cathari, but themselves. The Cathari had reminded them of something critical. That survival wasn't just about adapting to a harsh universe. It was about holding on to what makes a species unique, finding strength in unity, and learning from the past without repeating its mistakes. The Cathari would survive, and with their help, humanity would continue to learn and grow as well. Together, they had forged a new dawn.